The girl in the thrift store dress did not belong inside a 40-story bank tower in downtown Dallas, and everyone in that marble lobby knew it. She was 20 years old, soaked through from the rain, shivering from the cold, and clutching a black fireproof pouch so tightly her knuckles had gone white. At exactly 9:14 that morning, she walked up to the front desk, looked the receptionist dead in the eye, and said, "Tell Daniel Voss the people from Hollow Creek are done dying quietly." Most people in the lobby barely looked up. Daniel Voss did, because the second the security cameras zoomed in on that pouch, he saw the silver seal stamped across it, and the color drained from his face. That seal belonged to a land file his family had buried 12 years earlier, a file connected to a town that was supposed to be erased by Friday. And before that same day was over, federal agents would be standing inside his boardroom while men in custom suits tried to destroy evidence with their own hands. The girl's name was Nia Carson. She had spent the night before sleeping on a plastic bench in a bus station 2 miles away. She had $43 in her pocket, a fading bruise wrapped around her wrist, and one rule from her dead mother. If they ever come back for Hollow Creek, do not go to the police first. Go to the man who signed the first lie. Make him look at what he helped bury. And if you've ever seen power panic when the truth finally walks into the room, stay with me. Before this gets darker, drop your city in the comments. I want to know where you're watching from. Hollow Creek sat about 40 minutes outside Dallas, close enough to the skyline to be swallowed by it, far enough away to be forgotten by it. It had once been the kind of place cities pretend not to notice until developers decide it matters. Small houses, repair shops, a diner with cracked red booths, a gas station with flickering lights, a church with peeling white paint, a narrow creek that gave the town its name and, for generations, never gave anyone a reason to fear it. Then came the flood. Not a natural flood, not a 100-year storm, not some act of God no one could have prevented. This one came from a private retention basin built upstream for a luxury development financed by Blackstone Harbor Bank. When that wall gave way, the water tore into Hollow Creek at 2 in the morning like it had been aimed there. It smashed trailers, flipped cars, tore porch lights off houses, sent refrigerators floating down streets. Families climbed onto rooftops with children wrapped in blankets, waiting for helicopters that never came. Officially, the disaster was called an infrastructure failure. Unofficially, it was the night a group of rich men discovered exactly how cheap a poor neighborhood becomes after catastrophe. Because once the water went down, the real operation began. Insurance companies delayed claims. Inspectors downgraded homes. Property taxes mysteriously jumped. Relief checks vanished into review. And then the buyout letters started showing up in mailboxes. People who had lived there for 30 years were told their homes were no longer worth saving. Developers arrived, offering cash that wouldn't cover first month's rent anywhere decent in Dallas. Some families took the money because they had no choice. Others refused. Those were the families the paperwork hit hardest. Foreclosure notices, code violations, unsafe structure warnings, emergency demolition orders. One pressure wave after another until resistance started to feel impossible. Nia's mother, Mara Carson, had not grown up in Hollow Creek. She came there as an internal auditor for Blackstone Harbor, sent to review flood relief disbursements after a whistleblower complaint quietly reached a state office. At first, she was just another outsider with a laptop, a bank badge, and questions nobody wanted answered. Then she started asking the wrong ones. Why had dead residents signed compensation releases? Why had 3 empty LLCs received rebuilding contracts? Why were families approved for relocation grants never seeing the money? Why did a church lot suddenly appear in bank records as vacant commercial land? That was the moment she stopped being useful, and the moment Hollow Creek became dangerous to her. Daniel remembered Mara Carson, not because he knew her well, because he had seen her once, in a hallway outside a conference room, carrying a stack of files against her chest like she was holding explosives. He had been young then, newly promoted, polished, expensive suit, good haircut. That smooth kind of loyalty ambitious men mistake for character before they learn what their loyalty costs other people. His uncle, Marcus Voss, ran Blackstone Harbor like a private kingdom. Daniel signed what he was told to sign, approved what he was told to approve, ignored what he was told to ignore. Years later, he would call that pressure. The truth was uglier. He liked winning too much to ask what the victory was built on. So when security escorted Nia upstairs, Daniel expected fear. Instead, what he saw on her face was contempt. Not loud contempt, not theatrical contempt. The cold, settled kind that comes from growing up around people who lost everything, while men in towers called it market correction. She sat across from him, placed the pouch carefully on the conference table, and said, "My mother told me if Hollow Creek ever showed up on your demolition calendar again, I should bring this to you before they buried us for good." Daniel didn't touch it at first. "Your mother's name?" he asked. "Mara Carson." That hit him harder than he expected. Slowly, he opened the pouch. Inside was a property deed, water-damaged but preserved, stamped with the original acquisition seal of Blackstone Harbor, and signed by Walter Voss, Daniel's grandfather, 6 days before the old man officially died. Attached to it was a handwritten amendment, and that amendment changed everything. The land beneath Hollow Creek's church, clinic, and 13 surrounding homes had been transferred into a protected community trust. That meant the bank had never had the legal right to seize the center of the neighborhood. That meant every foreclosure, every forced sale, every demolition threat tied to that land had been poisoned from the beginning. And behind the deed was something else. A brass safety deposit key. Box 407, First State Credit Union, North Branch. There was one more thing in the pouch. A folded note in Mara Carson's handwriting. "If this reaches Daniel, then they chose greed again. Do not trust the board. Do not trust compliance. If he still has a conscience, take him to box 407 before they know the key exists." Daniel looked up slowly. "When did your mother die?" Nia held his gaze. "Officially? Gas leak in a motel outside Waco. 2 days after she told a state investigator she had enough evidence to stop the land seizure." Officially. That word settled into the room like smoke. Daniel reached for his phone and called the bank's general counsel, Rebecca Lynn. Rebecca had spent 10 years surviving powerful men by being smarter than all of them and quieter than most of them. When she arrived, Daniel told her to come alone. No assistant, no email trail, no calendar entry, no paper trail at all. Rebecca read the deed once and stopped breathing for half a second. Then she looked up and asked the only question that matters when the ground under a powerful institution starts to crack. "Who else knows?" "No one yet," Daniel said. Nia answered before he could say anything else. "That's not true." They both turned to her. She rolled back her sleeve. The bruise around her wrist had turned dark purple. "Someone followed me from the bus station," she said. "They didn't take my money. They didn't take my phone. They tried to take the pouch." That changed the temperature in the room. Because random theft is one thing, a targeted search is another. Daniel didn't go to the board. He didn't ask permission. He took Nia and Rebecca down a service elevator, walked them through a side exit, and put them into an unmarked fleet sedan. Then he drove them himself to the credit union on the north side. By then, Marcus Voss had already called twice, then 4 times, then 8. Daniel ignored every one of them. Box 407 held a stack of mini DV tapes, 3 flash drives, 2 spiral notebooks, and a sealed envelope marked "For Court Only." The first notebook was Mara's field log: names, dates, parcel numbers, account discrepancies. Short entries written by someone who knew she was being watched and had stopped wasting words. Family approved for $182,000 relocation disbursement. Received $14,500. House condemned before structural review. Compensation routed through Beacon Horizon redevelopment. Beacon Horizon has no staff. Check director list against Dominion Civic Partners. The second notebook was worse, much worse, because it didn't just describe corruption, it mapped the machine. Blackstone Harbor financed the flood retention project. The contractor underbuilt the wall. The failure depressed land value. Emergency funds moved through state channels. Consulting firms tied to Marcus Voss absorbed the money. Then the damaged land was scooped up cheap and bundled into a future logistics corridor already promised to a national shipping company. In other words, Hollow Creek hadn't been ruined because the system failed. It had been ruined because the system worked exactly as designed. Rebecca kept reading in silence until she hit one page that made her lean back. "What?" Daniel asked. She turned the notebook toward him. At the bottom of the page was his own signature. Then another. Then another. 36 times. Approvals for expedited title review, distressed acquisition priority, and emergency relocation processing. Daniel stared at them like they belonged to somebody else. "I never saw these full files." Rebecca didn't sugarcoat it. "You signed the cover sheets. Legally, that may be enough." Nia said nothing. She didn't need to. Shame is loudest when nobody helps you escape it. Then they played the first tape. A cheap motel lamp. A tired face. The camera tilted slightly sideways on a dresser. Mara Carson looked directly into the lens and said, "If you're watching this, then they either failed to stop me or finally decided the town was worth taking all the way." She laid it out piece by piece. The altered appraisals, the fake contamination notices, the forged releases, the intimidation campaign against elderly homeowners, the trust transfer hidden after Walter Voss discovered Marcus had built an acquisition machine around disaster recovery. And then came the part Daniel never saw coming. Walter Voss had tried to reverse it before his death. The deed in Nia's pouch was real. The trust was real. The reason it never surfaced was because someone inside Blackstone Harbor had replaced the corrected filing with an older seizure package and buried the originals. Then Mara named the person, not Marcus. Daniel's mother, Evelyn Voss. The room went still. Evelyn had died 9 years earlier. To the public, she was a philanthropist. To Daniel, she was the only person in that family who had ever looked him in the eye and told him power was a test most people fail. Mara continued on the tape. She did not create the fraud. She found it too late. She hid copies before Marcus could destroy them. She said her son was still blind, but not evil. I hope she was right. Daniel looked away from the screen. For the first time all day, Nia's expression changed. Not into trust, into recognition. She could see he had just realized his entire career had been built inside a lie older than he was. Then his phone rang again. Marcus. This time, Daniel answered. "Where are you?" Marcus asked. "At work." "Good," Marcus said, "because security just informed me you removed internal legal material from the premises with an unidentified trespasser. Return to the tower now." "You mean with the daughter of the woman your people left for dead?" Silence. Small, sharp, dangerous. Then Marcus laughed once, low and cold. "You still think this is about one town," he said. "Return to the tower, Daniel, or by tonight, every network in Texas will be running a story about an unstable drifter blackmailing a public company." The line went dead. Rebecca looked at Daniel. "He's moving already." And he was. By noon, Bank PR had circulated an internal memo describing Nia as a possible extortion risk. By 12:40, 2 board members were demanding an emergency review of Daniel's conduct. By 1:15, a local crime blog published a story claiming a homeless intruder had attempted to sell stolen property to a financial executive. By 2, a demolition crew had quietly moved Hollow Creek's start time from Friday to dawn the next morning. That was the real clock, not the headlines, not the board, not the spin. Bulldozers. Because once the first wall came down, evidence on the ground would disappear under dust, concrete, and official statements. Rebecca made the call Daniel should have made years earlier. She contacted a federal prosecutor, not state regulators, not internal audit, not anyone who played golf with board members. Federal public corruption. Then Daniel made a call of his own. He reached Hollow Creek's pastor, a man who had spent a decade being treated like a sentimental obstacle by people who called theft redevelopment. "Get everybody to the church," Daniel said. "Nobody leaves tonight." The pastor paused. What changed? Daniel looked at the deed in his hand. The truth finally showed up. If you're still with me, subscribe right now, because stories like this disappear when people stop paying attention. At 4:30, Daniel walked into the emergency board meeting carrying Mara's notebooks, copies of the tape files on 3 flash drives, and enough evidence to crack open everything his family had built. Marcus Voss was already seated at the head of the table, calm in the way only dangerous men can be calm when they still think they control the ending. The first attack landed exactly where Rebecca knew it would. Not on the flood, not on the fraud, on Nia. Marcus framed her as unstable, manipulated, coached by activists. He questioned Mara Carson's mental state. He implied forgery. He suggested Daniel was having some kind of emotional break brought on by family grief and outside pressure. Then he played his strongest card, Daniel's signatures. Page after page lit up on the screen. Approvals, fast-tracked acquisitions, emergency seizure authorizations. And silence filled the room because everybody there understood the same brutal law of wealthy institutions. Truth matters less than positioning when the powerful are deciding who gets sacrificed first. Marcus called for Daniel's immediate suspension. 3 hands rose, then 5, then 8. Daniel could feel the trap tightening. That was when Rebecca slid the sealed envelope from box 407 across the table. For court only. Inside was a notarized affidavit from Walter Voss's longtime estate attorney, executed 48 hours before the attorney died. It confirmed the trust transfer. Confirmed Walter had accused Marcus of criminal concealment. Confirmed Evelyn Voss had preserved duplicate records because she feared for her life. And attached to the affidavit was a transcribed voicemail from Marcus himself, left for the attorney 12 years earlier. If those Hollow Creek papers surface, I don't care what it costs, you make them disappear. That was the moment the room broke. Not emotionally, strategically. Men who had defended Marcus for a decade started silently calculating prison time. 2 directors stood up at once. One demanded outside counsel. Another reached for the envelope. Rebecca yanked it back and said, "Touch that, and I'll describe this exact moment to a grand jury in detail." Then Daniel made the only clean decision of his adult life. He pushed his chair back and said, "Suspend me if you want. But if one truck enters Hollow Creek before sunrise, I will hand every file I have to federal agents and testify that this bank operated a disaster-profit land theft scheme under my family's control, while I signed documents I was too cowardly to read." Marcus stood, and for the first time, the mask slipped. "You ungrateful fool," he said. Daniel didn't raise his voice. "No," he said. "Just late." At 6:12 p.m., Nia Carson was arrested outside the tower. Not by city police, by county deputies carrying a complaint for attempted extortion and possession of stolen financial materials. Marcus was still moving pieces. That should have buried the story. Instead, it detonated it. Because the arrest happened exactly 3 minutes after a reporter received anonymous footage of deputies refusing to log Nia's evidence bag on camera. And that reporter was not random. She was June Ellis, the journalist Mara Carson had tried to reach before she died. June went live before sunset. She said Hollow Creek, Blackstone Harbor, and disaster profit fraud in the same broadcast. That was enough. By 8 p.m., residents were already outside the church with lawn chairs, pickup trucks, folding tables, and phone flashlights. By 9:30, federal prosecutors filed for an emergency injunction. By 11, Rebecca had Nia released. By 2:07 in the morning, a judge signed an order freezing all demolition activity tied to the disputed parcels. At 5:48 a.m., the first bulldozer rolled toward Hollow Creek anyway, and it stopped 50 feet from the church, because the whole street was full. Mothers, roofers, retired nurses, teenagers in hoodies, old men leaning on canes, women holding coffee in paper cups, people the city had already erased in its imagination. And at the front of them stood Nia Carson, holding the deed high over her head like proof that paper can still fight back when enough people refuse to kneel. The driver shut off the engine. He had probably been told he was clearing condemned land. Now, there were cameras everywhere, lawyers everywhere, witnesses everywhere, and fear had changed addresses. At 7:16 a.m., federal agents entered Blackstone Harbor Tower with warrants. At 9:40, Marcus Voss was led through the same lobby where Nia had stood alone the day before. Only now, nobody ignored the person from Hollow Creek. The months that followed were ugly, expensive, and public, which is exactly what justice looks like when powerful people are finally forced to pay in the only language they respect. The fraud web ran through contractors, consultants, land brokers, inspectors, and public officials. 3 shell companies collapsed. 2 county inspectors were indicted. A redevelopment deal worth nearly $2 billion was frozen. Families once labeled non-viable occupants got their property titles reviewed in open court. The church trust held. The clinic land held. 13 homes marked for seizure were restored to the families they had been stolen from. Daniel Voss testified. Not heroically, honestly. He admitted what he signed, what he ignored, what ambition had made easy. He lost his job, his board seat, and the family name that had opened every door in his life. It was the first valuable thing that name had ever cost him. And Nia? Nia did not become famous. That matters. Because real courage is usually not glamorous after the cameras leave. She went back to Hollow Creek. She helped organize legal records, helped elderly residents file claims, helped turn an abandoned insurance office into a community resource center. And over the front desk, they hung the black, fireproof pouch in a glass case. Not because it was beautiful, because it survived. Under it, they mounted a small brass plate with one line engraved across it. They tried to bury a town. They forgot the town still had witnesses. And that is the lesson people with money keep learning too late. They think silence means surrender. They think poverty means weakness. They think if enough time passes, truth decays. It doesn't. It waits. Sometimes in a box, sometimes in a bruise, sometimes in the hands of a girl nobody wanted in the room. And when it finally walks through the front door, the men who built their lives on other people's losses always look shocked. Not because they're innocent, because they thought the bill would never reach them. It always does.